just 30 seconds, and a trembling voice whispered, "Daddy, I'm scared." A child he had never met yet, the words hit a millionaire like a blow to the chest, leaving him frozen. And the truth behind that voice, it didn't just unearth a past he had buried deep. It unlocked a secret powerful enough to alter the course of both their lives forever. So what was that truth? And why did a stranger's child call a millionaire Daddy? Chicago was settling into late autumn. Rain tapped softly against the glass window on the 38th floor of the Sterling West Hotel. In the warm golden light of the executive suite, Walter Grayson, age 45, founder and former CEO of a defense software company, had just taken off his tie after a grueling 9-hour meeting. He unbuttoned his collar, let out a long breath, and sat down beside a mahogany desk where an opened bottle of red wine had been waiting since earlier that evening. He poured himself half a glass, took a sip. Silence. The phone on the desk lit up. No caller ID. Walter glanced at his watch. 11:58 p.m. He didn't answer right away, but his finger hovered, hesitating. Just 2 minutes until midnight, and he knew all too well that the worst things often began with calls like this. He pressed accept. "Hello?" His voice was steady, slightly hoarse from exhaustion. No answer in the first 3 seconds. Then, breathless breathing. Software and, "Daddy, Daddy, I'm scared." Walter shot to his feet, the wineglass tilted in his hand, spilling red down the cuff of his shirt. He looked around the room as if to confirm he was still awake, but the call continued. "Mum's yelling again. She broke a bowl. I don't know what to do." A choked sob. Then the crash of something breaking. A woman's voice, harsh and close to the phone's mic. "You calling someone again? Give me that phone." And the line went dead. Walter kept the phone pressed to his ear for a few more seconds, as if by holding it there, some explanation might come through a name, a clue, anything to prove what he just heard was real. But there was nothing, only rain and a dark screen. He slowly set the phone back on the desk and stepped away toward the bed, his eyes fixed on the touchscreen as if it had just spoken with the voice of a ghost. "Daddy." Those 2 syllables looped through his mind. No one had called him Daddy in 6 years. 6 years ago, Shannon, his ex-wife, told him she had miscarried. By then, their divorce papers were already signed. She moved out of the estate within weeks and left no forwarding address. Shannon told him the baby was gone, and Walter, worn down by months of fighting and heartache, didn't ask further. No medical documents, no ultrasound photo, just one message: "Don't look for me. I lost the baby." He remembered it clearly, because in the sleepless nights after the divorce, he had reread that message dozens of times. And now, after all those years, a child's voice, calling him Daddy. He grabbed his phone, checked the call history. No number displayed. He tried calling back. The operator replied, "Unable to connect." Walter began pacing the room, like someone trying to keep himself from unraveling. He opened his laptop, searched for anonymous call tracing services, but without access to carrier data, there was nothing he could do. He wasn't law enforcement. He returned to his seat, typed a name into the search bar, Shannon Marlowe. Pages of results appeared, but nothing useful. A few old social media posts, no updates in years, no address, no phone number, no trace. He sat still. Then opened an old photo album. A photo of the 2 of them standing on the front porch, the day Shannon said she was pregnant. She was smiling a rare, unguarded smile in the final months of their marriage. Her hand rested gently on her belly. Back then, he still believed life would begin again with the child growing inside his wife. Walter zoomed in on Shannon's hand in the photo. then leaned back into his chair. 2 a.m. Walter was still wide awake. That phone call hadn't just startled him, it had reopened a chapter that had never truly closed. He dialed Mason, his closest friend and former military security advisor. "Something's happened. At this hour, I need to trace the source of an anonymous call." "Serious? It could be my child. I'm not sure, but a kid called me Dad and then hung up." Mason went silent. After a moment, he replied, "I'll reach out to someone inside the telecom system. Send me the timestamp and device info." Walter sent over everything he had. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Just before hanging up, Mason asked, "Are you sure it was your kid?" "I don't know, but if it is, then I've been absent for 6 years and never even knew." Walter pressed his palm against his forehead, eyes still locked on that faded photo. One question echoed in his mind, over and over like a midnight toll. Why did the child call me Dad? A child doesn't say that by mistake unless someone had shown him Walter's face, told him stories about him, or maybe it was the blood itself speaking. And Walter had no idea. That call wasn't just a cry for help. It was the door swinging open on a shattering truth, one that would turn his entire world upside down. After the midnight call, Walter could barely sleep. It wasn't the rain, it wasn't the unfamiliar hotel bed. It was 2 words that echoed in his head from the moment he hung up until dawn. Daddy. They weren't loud, they weren't sharp, but they repeated steadily like a second hand pressing against his chest. And as the first light of morning spilled through the 38th floor window, Walter knew. This couldn't be dismissed like a dream. At 7 a.m., a black Lincoln rolled away from the hotel toward LaGuardia Airport. Walter had already called to postpone all meetings for the week and booked the earliest flight back to New York, not for business, but to face what he had avoided for 6 long years, the name Shannon Marlowe. His old office was still on the 40th floor of a glass building in Midtown. Though he no longer ran the company, Walter had kept a private space quiet, orderly, with an empty desk and a worn leather chair where he'd once spent thousands of hours. When he set his laptop on the desk, he didn't check email, didn't read the news. He opened a folder he hadn't touched in years. Shannon, 2016. Dozens of photos appeared. The wedding day, their trip to Venice, their first Christmas in the Connecticut estate. And among those beautiful moments, one photo stood out. Shannon, standing on the porch, one hand resting on her belly, her smile soft but uncertain. It was the picture she'd sent him just days before she left. The caption beneath read, 12 weeks. He still remembered. It was a Wednesday. They'd argued that morning about money, about work schedules, even about what to name the baby. She said he always needed to control everything. He said she lived without a plan. And by Saturday, she was gone, moved out without a word. 3 days later, he received a single cold message. Don't look for me. I lost it. No hospital records, no doctor's note, no proof, just those few stark words glowing on his phone screen. But Walter didn't ask for more. Not because he fully believed her, but because they were both drained. The pregnancy, what they thought would save the marriage, turned out to be a slow-burning fuse that blew it apart. And in that exhaustion, Walter let go. Now, 6 years later, the voice of a child whispering, "Daddy," on the other end of the line, pulled every buried memory to the surface like an earthquake with no warning. His phone buzzed. The screen lit up. "Mason, I just sent you the data you needed. Check your email." Walter opened the attachment. Trace log 1123.pdf. Source, a cell tower near the edge of a small town, Hannibal, Missouri. A small town, low population, mostly lower income housing. The call came from a burner phone, prepaid SIM. No registered ID, Mason said on the line. I remember Shannon had an aunt in Missouri. Ring a bell? Walter did remember. Her name was Laverne. Not particularly close, but Shannon had visited her a few times. Should I go? Walter asked. If I were you, I'd already be on the road. You think I'm imagining things? I think if a child calls you daddy in the middle of the night begging for help, you don't sit still. Especially not if you've spent years believing you didn't have a child. Walter didn't answer. He turned to the window. The rain had stopped, but the glass was still fogged with mist. That afternoon, he returned to the penthouse on the Upper West Side, a place that once echoed with Shannon's laughter, the hum of the washing machine, and quiet evenings spent reading by the fireplace. Now, it was so silent, he could hear the keys clinking in his own hand. He opened the safe and took out an old wooden box. Inside were a few things he'd never thrown away: their old wedding ring, a printed ultrasound from an email, and a handwritten letter Shannon had started but never finished. The ultrasound didn't list a hospital, no date, no timestamp, just a blurry, black and white image of a tiny fetus. Back then he hadn't thought much of it, but now every faint detail of that image gripped his heart like a vice. He grabbed his phone and Googled Shannon Marlowe plus Missouri. Nothing stood out. But then, in an old newsletter from a local charity, Walter spotted a single line buried in the list of aid recipients from 2017. S. Marlowe, single mother with a young child. His heart sank. She had lied, not just about the miscarriage, but about the very existence of the child. Why? Was she afraid of losing custody? Afraid he'd interfere? Or was she hiding something deeper? Walter called Mason. I need one more thing. Check civil records, school enrollment, welfare support, anything under the name Marlowe in Hannibal from 2017 onward. Understood. What are you planning to do? I'm flying out tonight. I can't wait any longer. Walter packed quickly, taking his laptop, the wooden box, and an old photo. Before closing the apartment door behind him, he turned to take one last look at the familiar space, a place that had once been peaceful and spotless, almost to the point of loneliness. And in that moment, he realized his life was about to change. All because of a phone call. He almost didn't answer. The road leading into the town of Hannibal was littered with decaying leaves. The curb was uneven, as if it hadn't seen a repair crew in years. The sun had barely climbed a hand's width above the horizon, yet the air was already thick, cloaked in the damp, smoky scent of old wood stoves burning in the squat houses that lined both sides of the street. Walter cracked his car window a few inches, but quickly rolled it back up as dust swept in and hit him square in the face. The GPS led him to a quiet corner, an old, lower-income neighborhood with peeling rooftops, half-broken fences, and a few kids playing with rocks on a pothole-ridden road. In front of him stood a faded two-story wooden house, pale green and weather-worn. The number 413 Cedar Drive. It matched the information Mason had sent over the night before. Walter stopped the car, turned off the engine, and sat still for a few seconds. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. If there's a kid in there, if it's really him, he muttered, leaving the sentence unfinished. He stepped out and walked toward the porch. The old wooden steps groaned beneath his weight. On the doorknob, a bright warning notice from the electric company had been taped. Past due. Service. Disconnection. Imminent. He knocked on the door. No response. He knocked again. Still nothing. The third knock finally yielded a sliver of movement. The door opened just a crack. A young boy peeked out, maybe 6 or 7 years old, hair tousled, face pale, still holding a cracked cell phone in one hand. His eyes deep, dark, locked onto Walter's. And for the briefest second, Walter saw his own 7-year-old self staring back at him. The boy looked at him quietly, didn't say a word. "Are you Eli?" Walter asked, doing his best to keep his voice steady. The boy blinked, took a small step back. From inside came the sound of a chair scraping against the floor and a shrill woman's voice calling out, "Eli! Who's at the door? I told you not to open it for strangers." The boy turned his head. Panic flickered across his face. He hesitated, then opened the door a little wider. And that's when Walter saw her, Shannon, her hair tied back hastily, no makeup, wearing a wrinkled tank top, a tomato sauce-covered ladle still in her hand. The kitchen behind her was a mess, dishes stacked high, instant noodle wrappers scattered about, a knife left carelessly beside a bowl of cold soup. She froze for a second, then squinted at him like she was seeing a ghost. "Walter, what the hell are you doing here?" she asked, not with surprise but with a guarded edge in her voice. "I'm here for my son," Walter said plainly, eyes fixed on Eli. "Your son?" Shannon let out a sharp laugh. "He's not your son. You're imagining things." Walter took one step forward. Eli stepped back. "What's his name?" Walter asked. "Eli," she replied. "But he has nothing to do with you." "I once planned to name my son Eli. You know that." Shannon turned away and poured a glass of water from a plastic jug. "Here we go again. You came all the way here just to stir up the past? You should leave. I don't want any trouble. The boy called me Dad." The words froze the room. Eli stood with his back against the wall, still clutching the old phone. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he clearly sensed something was wrong. His eyes flicked back and forth between Walter and his mother, as if waiting for one of them to break down in tears. Shannon slammed the glass down on the table. Her restraint was beginning to crack. He calls anyone Dad when he's scared. That's how kids are. They fantasize, they confuse things, they turn strangers into heroes. "No, Shannon. You know he didn't call the wrong person. Don't deny what your own eyes are giving away." Shannon let out a bitter laugh. "You really think I've been hiding your child for 6 years? You believed me when I said I lost the baby, remember?" Walter didn't argue. He looked at Eli. The boy was still silent, saying nothing, but the way he pulled his shoulders in, the way he avoided his mother's gaze, spoke louder than any words. Walter knelt slightly, his voice soft. "Eli, did you call me last night?" The boy opened his mouth as if to speak, but then Shannon's eyes shot toward him. He swallowed his words and lowered his head. "He didn't call anyone," Shannon cut in, stepping forward to pull Eli toward her. "He was just playing with the phone. He has no idea what he's doing, and I forbid you to scare him." Walter took a step back. Even in the daylight, the house suddenly felt like a sealed box, airless and heavy. He turned to look at the boy one more time. Their eyes met, just for a second. Eli didn't say a word, but one thing was certain. He knew him. Not with logic, but with something deeper, something primal. The kind of knowing that lets a child find the right person in a sea of unfamiliar faces. Slowly, Walter reached into his wallet. He pulled out a small photo, a printout of a picture Shannon had taken when she was pregnant. The one she sent him 6 years ago. He placed it on the table, looked at her. 3 days after this photo, you texted me saying the baby was gone. But look at him, Shannon. You don't have to say a word, his face says it all. Shannon didn't touch the photo. She stood frozen, like stone. Then, through gritted teeth, she snapped, "I don't want to see you here ever again. This is my house, my child, my life. Get out." He turned away and walked out of the house, leaving behind an open door, a woman shaken to the core, and a child still clutching a phone in his small hand. Walter left the house on Cedar Drive with heavy, burdened steps. The door behind him didn't close. No one called out. No explanation was given. He stepped off the rotting porch, as if waking from a dream, only to crash face first into reality. Shannon was still in denial. And Eli, if he really was Walter's son, was living in a place that could hardly be called a home. In the car, Walter sat frozen behind the wheel for over 10 minutes, staring straight through the windshield. The kids who had been on the corner earlier were gone. The whole neighborhood had gone unnaturally still. He pulled out his phone, his hand still trembling slightly. The photo he'd secretly snapped of Eli with his smartwatch when he first entered the house blurry, from the side, but the forehead, the nose, the eyes. They looked uncannily like his. Number that couldn't just be coincidence. He called Mason. "I just saw him. I think it's the boy." What did Shannon say? She denied everything, said I was imagining things, making it up. And the boy, he didn't say a word, but his eyes. "Mason, I know he's my son. Stay calm. Don't do anything rash. She has legal custody unless there's evidence. You need to go through the proper channels." Walter nodded. He knew that, but it didn't make the tightness in his chest ease up. That afternoon, he returned to the small motel near the town center. A dingy single room with musty carpet and frayed curtains. But he didn't care. He opened his laptop and revisited the documents Mason had sent earlier. Lists of welfare recipients, records of Shannon's visits to the community clinic, insurance forms. Not a single document listed a father's name in connection to Eli. Everything had been carefully orchestrated. Shannon had turned Eli into the child with no father, and the law without hard proof wouldn't be on Walter's side. He knew that if he wanted to uncover the truth, it had to start with the boy. The next morning, Walter stood across the street from the old house. His car was parked next to a small convenience store. Through the windshield, he watched the front door of the Cedar Drive home with quiet focus. Around 7:45 a.m., the door opened. Shannon stepped out, dragging Eli behind her. Her hand clamped tightly around the boy's wrist like she was holding a bag. She was saying something. Eli was silent, his shoulders hunched. She marched him across the street to an old silver car. The engine roared to life, then sped away. Walter followed, keeping a careful distance. The car stopped in front of a local elementary school. Eli stepped out first, quiet as a shadow. Shannon didn't kiss him goodbye, didn't say a word of instruction. She just turned the car around and drove off. Walter waited until Eli had gone through the gates. Then he got out of his car. The principal's office was small. A tired-looking middle-aged woman named Mrs. Grant received him after glancing at his business card. "I can't share student information without proof of guardianship, Mr. Grayson," she said, pushing the file he'd laid on the desk back toward him. "I understand. I'm asking for one thing. A simple, honest assessment of Eli. Is he okay? Does he have friends? Have you noticed anything unusual?" She looked at him as if weighing a father's heart against the possibility of a stranger's curiosity. Finally, she pulled out a slip of paper, scribbled something down, and slid it across the desk. "I can't say anything officially, but if you really want to know, talk to this person. She's Eli's homeroom teacher, not during school hours, but she cares about that boy." The note read, "Ms. Carla Renner, Teachers Class 2C, Penny Corner Cafe, after 6 p.m. At 6:20 that evening, Walter sat in a quiet corner of Penny Corner, a small-town cafe where locals gathered for cheap coffee and to complain about rising electric bills. The teacher arrived, wearing a grey fleece jacket, her hair tied up, carrying a canvas bag full of lesson plans and craft supplies. "You're Eli's father?" she asked the moment she sat down. I'm not sure, but I need to know, is he okay? Carla looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she spoke. Eli doesn't have close friends. He doesn't talk much. He often asks to use the restroom during lessons, probably to avoid being called on. When I ask questions, he usually stays silent. But once, I saw him dozing off in class. His eyes had dark circles. I called the nurse. His blood pressure was low. When I asked again, he said, "Mum didn't let me eat breakfast because I spilled the milk on the floor." Walter leaned forward, clenching his hands under the table. I reported it to school administration. But since Shannon is the legal guardian and there's no obvious sign of physical abuse, they advised me not to escalate. Carla lowered her voice. But I know, that child is living in fear. That night, Walter returned to the motel heavier than ever. He reopened the photo of Eli, replayed the secret audio recording he had made at the cafe. In that cold, dim room, he stared at the picture of the boy by the doorway from the day before, and for the first time in 6 years, he realized just how badly he'd erred by believing Shannon without ever checking the truth. Did I let my child grow up like this? He asked himself. But the only reply was silence. The room offered no answers, but within him, denial had finally cracked, giving way to a truth no piece of paper could verify. Yet he knew without a doubt, Eli was his son. A day after leaving the old cabin in Hannibal, Walter found himself in the office of attorney Daniel Hale, a longtime friend and family law specialist, who had once helped him navigate his divorce from Shannon. The office was tucked away on the west side of Manhattan, with frosted glass windows and the faint smell of burnt coffee. It wasn't flashy like the big law firms downtown, but it was discreet and effective, exactly the kind of place Walter needed right now. Daniel leaned forward as Walter recounted the entire story, the midnight phone call, the unexpected meeting with Shannon, the boy named Eli, and the unmistakable look in the child's eyes. "The problem is," Walter finished, "I have no legal rights. I'm not a guardian. I'm not on the birth certificate. I can't even prove he's mine." Daniel nodded, tapping his pen lightly against the desk. "Then we start with paperwork." He turned to his assistant and gave a quick signal to call in a long-time partner, Carla Jimenez, a civil investigator who had once worked in the Missouri State Vital Records Office before moving into private practice. That afternoon, they gathered in a closed conference room. Carla opened a pre-printed file and placed it in front of Walter. "This is the birth certificate for Eli Marlowe, born at Mercy Hospital, Hannibal, Missouri. The birth date matches what you told us." Walter picked up the paper. The first line read, "Mother's name, Shannon Marlowe," but the line for father's name was completely blank. "No father," Walter frowned. "It's not a clerical error," Carla explained. "It was left blank deliberately. When a mother chooses to file as a single parent and doesn't list the father, the state has no authority to require it." Daniel cut in. "And that qualifies her for a wide range of public benefits." Carla nodded, flipping through several more pages, photocopies of applications Shannon had submitted between 2017 and 2020. Each form was marked with "Father Unknown" or "Father Abandoned" during pregnancy. Shannon received nearly $36,000 in benefits from various state programs, SNAP, Medicaid, housing vouchers, and aid from 2 non-governmental charities. All of them require that no father be listed on record. Walter sat still, speechless. In front of him, every number, every form now cut like a blade through his awareness. She had turned the child into a survival tool, quietly and legally. "So if Shannon admits I'm the father," Walter said slowly, "she'd lose everything?" Carla nodded again. "The whole file would be flagged for fraud. She could be prosecuted. At the very least, her benefits would be revoked. At worst, she'd have to repay the full amount and face probation or jail time. "And if I want custody of Eli," Daniel answered, "you'll need a DNA test. But for that, Shannon either has to give consent or will need strong legal grounds to petition the court for an order." Walter fell silent for a long moment. Outside the window, the city buzzed on. People moved along the sidewalks, unaware that some children were erased from their fathers' lives, not because the fathers abandoned them, but because the mothers hid them. For money. Carla glanced at Walter, then spoke more softly. "I've worked on hundreds of these cases, and there's one thing I've come to understand. People like Shannon, they don't need you to be a father. They need you to disappear. The cleaner the slate, the easier the check." That line hit Walter like a punch to the chest. He thought of Eli, the boy's eyes at the doorway, silent, yet filled with unspoken truths. He remembered Shannon screaming, her face pale, her eyes darting away the moment she saw him place that old photograph on the table. Walter looked up. "What do we need to compel the court to allow a DNA test?" Daniel opened his laptop and began drafting a letter. "Witness testimony, reasonable suspicion, and something else, something tangible, a photo, a voice recording, anything that shows a connection between you and Eli." Walter thought for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone and opened the camera roll, an image of Eli standing at the door, holding a chipped cell phone. That phone, Walter remembered it clearly, was a model he had once given Shannon before their breakup. A limited edition, sold only once, not widely available, impossible to confuse. He zoomed in. The paint was peeling, but the engraving on the back was still faintly visible. "You'll never be alone, WG. I think I've got what we need." Daniel nodded. "Good. This is where we begin." Walter looked at the birth certificate again. His name absent. A blank line, cold and indifferent. But Eli existed. He was alive, breathing, and had called him Dad. Nothing could erase that. He stood, clenched his fists. "I don't care about the past anymore. I just want that child to live with the truth he deserves." A week after Walter filed a petition for a paternity test with Eli, his personal assistant received a strange phone call. Not from a lawyer, not from the press, but from Shannon Marlowe herself. "Tell Walter I agree to the test." Her voice was cold as ice. "But I want to meet in person. No lawyers, just the two of us, once husband and wife." When the message was relayed to him, Walter stayed silent for a few seconds, then nodded. "Tell her I agree." "Where?" "Red Fern Cafe, a small place on the outskirts of Hannibal, about a 15-minute drive from Shannon's cabin. No cameras, no regulars, no witnesses." Walter knew this wasn't going to be a warm reunion, but he went. At 9:45 a.m., a black SUV rolled to a slow stop in front of the cafe. The sky was overcast, and the chilly wind stirred the dry leaves around his feet. Shannon was already there, long-sleeved black dress, hair neatly tied up, an iced coffee in front of her. She looked up at Walter without a smile, offering only a brief nod. Walter pulled out a chair. His eyes held no bitterness, only caution. "Say what you need to say," he began. Shannon wet her lips. Her eyes didn't blink. "I'll allow the test, but there's a condition." "I don't negotiate when it comes to my child," Walter replied, his tone like steel. "Well, I do," she said, lips tight. "No press. No media. No turning this into a headline. I don't want Eli dragged onto the stage of your wealthy world." Walter stared straight into her eyes. "I never involved the press in this. But if you're that afraid, then you're clearly hiding something." Shannon gave a faint, joyless laugh. She slid a piece of paper across the table an official consent form for the paternity test, already signed. Take this to the court. I'll bring Eli to the hospital tomorrow. Walter took the paper and read it carefully. It was legitimate. Everything seemed almost too easy. And that's exactly why it didn't feel right. The meeting was too brief. Shannon didn't ask why Walter had come back. She didn't mention the fact that Eli had once called him Dad. There was no real emotion. It felt like a transaction. Walter left the cafe at 10:12 a.m. As he reached his car, he noticed two plainclothes officers standing by the curb. "Mr. Walter Grayson." "Yes. You're being urgently summoned to clarify a criminal complaint. Please come with us." Walter froze. A complaint? About what? One of them produced a detention order. The other pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Miss Shannon Marlowe has filed a report alleging that you made threats, attempted to coerce her into handing over custody, and suggested a legal bribe to gain custody of Eli." "She said what?" Walter's voice tightened, a mix of disbelief and anger. "She claims you said, 'I'll use my money to sway the court and take that boy at any cost.' She stated she was extremely frightened." "I never said that. I didn't." "We understand, sir. But at this time, we have to follow detention and questioning procedures." At the Hannibal police station, Walter sat across from the investigator, doing his best to stay calm. He recounted the entire conversation at the cafe, his tone soft. No threats, no bribes, no coercion. But the audio file Shannon submitted told a different story. A man's voice, cold and sharp, played on the recording. "I'll take him, whether you want me to or not." Then another line. "I have money. You'd be wise to cooperate." Walter went numb. That was his voice, but not his words. They were fragments, spliced together and reassembled with editing software. Innocent phrases twisted into threats. Shannon had orchestrated everything. She chose a cafe with no cameras, steered the conversation, and left as soon as she had what she needed. Just hours later, the complaint was filed complete with the manipulated recording. The system, whether blindly or willfully, chose to believe the tearful single mother over the wealthy man in the tailored suit. And Walter understood. That phone call, "Daddy, I'm scared," was only the beginning. The battle to reclaim the child and the truth had just begun. By 4 p.m., Walter was released on a temporary basis after signing a commitment to cooperate with the investigation. He had just climbed into his car, not even closed the door yet, when his private attorney, Daniel Hale, called. "You're not to make any contact with Eli for the next 7 days," Daniel said quickly. "Not until Shannon withdraws the complaint. If she doesn't, we'll have to file a counterclaim and prove she's lying." "She's turning me into a kidnapper," Walter growled, gripping the steering wheel. "And she's hitting your soft spot, your emotions. She knows you'll lose control if Eli's threatened. I won't let her erase me from that boy's life." Daniel's voice dropped low. "Then this time, you fight like a father, not like a CEO." That night, the media exploded. Tech millionaire accused of coercing custody transfer. Father reappears after 6 years, immediately tied to criminal allegations. Trashy blogs began piling on, hiring private investigators, stalking Shannon, bribing lawyers. Walter said nothing. No texts, no calls. He sat in his car until nearly midnight, his head leaning against the window, fists clenched around the consent form for a DNA test, the only piece of evidence he still had. He whispered to himself, alone, "I won't let her take him from me. Not again." At that very moment, Shannon's front door flew open. She stepped inside, a crooked smirk on her face. She turned on the TV, flipping channels until she caught the segment. Walter Grayson, now under investigation, after a criminal complaint filed by Ms. Shannon Marlowe. She slammed the remote onto the table, poured herself a glass of vodka, no ice, lit a cigarette. Leaning back in her chair, she murmured at the screen. "You think you're smarter than me? Welcome to hell, Walter." At the end of the hallway, Eli sat huddled in a corner, his ears pressed to his knees. He had heard everything, his mother's footsteps, every spiteful word. Shannon approached, stopping right in front of him. "Well done. You called Daddy, huh? Think he's going to save you?" Eli shook his head, saying nothing, but his small hands gripped the frayed edge of his jeans. "I told you not to call anyone. One more time, and I swear you'll sleep on the street." The boy nodded, biting his lip so hard it bled. Shannon turned away, puffing her cigarette. "Dead weight. If your name hadn't matched the file, I'd have dumped you last year." Eli didn't cry. He had learned. Silence was the only way to survive. From his pocket, he pulled out a folded, worn piece of calendar paper. Inside was a crude drawing, an older man with silver hair in a suit, holding hands with a small boy. At the bottom, in shaky child handwriting, were the words, "Dad, if you're real, I'm still waiting for you." The next afternoon, on the 16th floor of the St. Louis Central Glass Tower, inside the private conference room of Hale and Brantley Law, a space typically reserved for high-level clients, the air hung heavy and still. Walter sat at the head of the long table, sleeves rolled up on his white dress shirt, top 2 buttons undone, tie loosened. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion from a sleepless night, yet his gaze was sharp, forged, steel sharp. To his left sat Daniel, lead attorney. On his right were Brina, legal specialist, Lester, media consultant, and Leon, a former FBI agent, now working as an independent investigator. No coffee, no smiles. They were entering a battle not with fists, but with law to reclaim a child. Daniel began, his voice deliberate, each word clear and heavy. "You must not speak to the press. No statements, no explanations. The more you say, the more ground Shannon has to countersue. Our job is to let the truth speak through evidence." Walter nodded. He took a slow breath, then spoke with quiet force. "I stayed silent for 6 years. I can wait another 7 days, as long as after that, I've got enough ammo to shoot back." Brina slid a grey file folder across the table toward him. "We've begun reviewing the full communication history between you and Shannon. In the recording from the night you called Eli, your tone was calm. No coercion. No manipulation. Just one question. Why is the boy calling me Dad?" And instead of answering, Shannon grabbed the phone. Leon turned his laptop around, clicking play on a security camera clip. "This is from Red Fern Cafe, your meeting with Shannon. No audio, but the visuals are crystal clear. Shannon doesn't appear scared. She pulls out documents on her own. She leaves on her own. There's no indication of threat or intimidation." Lester added, "We're also looking into footage from the Pine Root restaurant. Shannon once held a party there with a man named Wayne Bittner, previously investigated for assaulting women. It's possible she's pulled this same stunt before playing the victim for profit or to dodge charges." Brina opened another folder, her voice lowering with weight. "And this is the most critical piece. We recovered a voice recording from an old phone Eli secretly used that night. He's the one who initiated the call to you." She pressed play. The boy's voice came through the small speaker, raspy, strained. "Dad, it's me. I'm Eli. Eli, you're calling me. That's why I had to sneak the call. I know you're not supposed to see me, but I have to tell you." Then came a shaky breath. His voice cracked. "She won't feed me. She slammed my head into the wall. I'm scared. If I talk, she'll sell me to Black Nails." The room fell silent. Only the soft, rhythmic patter of rain tapped against the glass. Walter lowered his head, his hand on the table clenched tight. The veins in his neck stood out. Brina continued, her voice quieter now. The school doctor confirmed Eli showed signs of severe stress, flinching at loud door slams, chronic insomnia. He also had recurring bruises around his shoulders and neck. These weren't accidents. They were patterns, Leon added. A neighbor once saw Shannon yelling at the boy in the middle of the yard, yanking Eli's arm so hard he fell down. But Shannon always had an excuse. He's just too sensitive. It's all been documented. Lester turned to Walter. We're working on a strategy to bring the truth to light. But the timing has to be right. If we move too early, Shannon will cancel the DNA test, transfer Eli to another school, maybe even take him out of state. She'll turn it into a custody battle and drag it out for years. Walter stood up and walked toward the wide glass window. Below him, the city of St. Louis stretched out, wet and sluggish. He spoke softly, but each word felt like it came from deep in his chest. I once stepped away from my own son, because I didn't know. But now I'm not letting anyone take that boy from me. Not again. Leon looked around the room and nodded. If Eli is willing to speak, we have gold. His testimony would be a game changer. But even if he doesn't, we still have a way forward, the truth that his fatherhood was hidden for 9 years. And the abuse, that's undeniable. Walter turned back to face them. His eyes no longer looked lost. They were clear, focused, and burning with resolve. I won't let that boy stand alone in this fight. Not this time. This time. I'll fight the right way. Outside, the rain had begun to fall harder, but inside that meeting room, a chessboard had been set, and the pieces had already begun to move. 7 days after the meeting on the 16th floor, every piece of the truth had fallen into place. That very morning, Walter signed an emergency petition to the 5th District Court, citing Clause 41.3b, which allows for expedited hearings in cases where a child is suspected of abuse or at risk of serious harm. Attached to the petition was a 32-page file, including an audio recording of a phone call, photographs of the home where Eli had been living, a medical report from the school, and a detailed statement from a social worker. It took the court just 3 days to issue a ruling. An emergency hearing would be held, and Shannon was ordered to submit a DNA sample for a paternity test. At that point, Shannon still believed she held the upper hand. She signed the paperwork without hesitation. She had no idea the tide was turning. When Eli's blood was drawn, he clutched an old, worn-out handkerchief tightly in his fist. He sat silently, without shedding a single tear. Brina stayed by his side the entire time. She didn't say much, just softly read the names of the stars taped to the hospital ceiling and told him that each one would lead the way to the truth. And now, St. Louis woke up to a morning heavy as stone. Outside the gates of the 5th District Court, a crowd pressed up against the iron barriers. News cameras blanketed the sidewalks like a flock of black birds circling over something that hadn't yet died. The headline running on the live stream read, "Millionaire accused of kidnapping illegitimate son. Court hearing opens this morning." A grey SUV pulled up to the curb. Walter stepped out, dark suit, no tie, his face set like carved granite. Beside him were his attorney, Daniel, and media advisor, Lester. He didn't glance at the crowd. His eyes were fixed on the heavy wooden doors ahead, where everything would be decided. Inside the courtroom, Shannon was already seated, beige dress, light red lipstick, face meticulously made up. She looked every bit the part of a wounded mother. Her attorney was a young woman, slender, with a soft voice that smelled like vanilla, but her eyes were sharp with calculation. Judge Monroe, nearing 60, Silver-rimmed glasses gently tapped the gavel. Court is now in session. The plaintiff's attorney began with a tone that sounded as if reading from a script, one written like a Greek tragedy. Your Honor, my client is a single mother who was abandoned while pregnant. For the past 8 years, she has raised this child on her own, without a single ounce of support from the father. Now, suddenly, he reappears armed with wealth and influence and seeks to take away the very child she's sacrificed her life to protect. Shannon bowed her head slightly, dabbing the corner of her eye with a tissue. A few hushed murmurs of sympathy rose from the back rows. Daniel stood. His voice was calm, restrained. We intend to prove that Mr. Walter Morrow is not only Eli's biological father, but the only person who has truly acted in the boy's best interest. Brina stepped forward and placed the first file on the table. Your Honor, this is an audio recording of a phone call between Eli and Mr. Walter, secretly made in the early hours of the morning inside the respondent's home. She pressed play. The sound came through clearly on the speakers. Mom won't let me eat. She hit my head against the wall. If I tell, she says she'll throw me out. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Shannon turned pale. The plaintiff's attorney jumped to her feet. Objection! The recording is inadmissible. Judge Monroe lifted his glasses slightly. The evidence has been verified by an independent investigative agency. Overruled. Proceed. Daniel turned to the large screen behind him. These are photographs of Eli's living conditions. A roof with holes, rotting wooden floors, a bathroom with no hot water. And this is surveillance footage from Red Fern Restaurant, the time Shannon claimed Mr. Walter threatened her. She was the one who approached first and left first. There was no coercive behavior. The entire courtroom was glued to the screen. Shannon's face went rigid. Brina opened a new folder. Your Honor, over the past 8 years, Ms. Shannon has received more than $72,000 in government assistance designated for abandoned single mothers. In her filings, she explicitly stated, Father unknown. Brina flipped to the financial statements. Nearly all of the funds were spent on personal expenses, cosmetics, shopping, travel. There is no record of payments for Eli's tuition, medical care, or meals. Judge Monroe turned his eyes directly toward Shannon. Miss Shannon, do you deny deliberately concealing the identity of the child's father in order to continue receiving benefits? Shannon's lips trembled. I just wanted to live in peace. Daniel spoke, his tone firm but not raised. My client had no knowledge of having a son, but once he learned the truth, he didn't run. He showed up, asked questions, offered to care for the boy, and was met with threats, false accusations, and efforts to block him from seeing his own child. After a long pause, Judge Monroe tapped his gavel. The court grants approval for a DNA test. Pending the results, Mr. Walter Morrow is permitted supervised visitation with Eli. Shannon sprang to her feet, shouting, No! He's not allowed to touch my son. The judge's voice sharpened. Miss Shannon, any further outbursts, and I will have you removed from this courtroom. Walter said nothing, but as he lowered his head, his lips tightened, trembling slightly. His chest rose and fell as if he had just surfaced from drowning. After 8 years, he was no longer shut out of the story that was rightfully his. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows behind the judge's bench. A door had cracked open, and for the first time, the truth had a chance to step into the light. 1 week after the initial hearing, the courtroom at District Court Number 5 was packed, like something historic was about to unfold. The headlines had shifted. No longer screaming about a millionaire kidnapping his stepson, they now circled a deeper question. Was the child truly rescued from a life built on lies? Outside District Court Number 5, the crowd pressed shoulder to shoulder behind cold steel barricades. TV cameras hovered like black birds, waiting for a final tear in the carcass. But this time, they weren't there for scandal. They were there for justice. At exactly 7:56 a.m., a grey SUV rolled to a stop. Walter stepped out first. Dark suit, no tie, his face worn with fatigue, but his eyes burned with quiet fire. Beside him stood Daniel, his stone-faced attorney, and Brina, clutching a thick, red-bound folder. None of them glanced at the crowd. All eyes were fixed on the massive wooden doors ahead, the place where a child's future would be decided. Inside the courtroom, Judge Monroe sat behind a long table draped in black. He tapped his gavel lightly on the cold wood. "Bring in the test results." A court officer stepped forward and handed Daniel a sealed white envelope. Red print across the top read, "Paternity test results to be opened in court." Daniel opened it. His hands didn't tremble. He handed the paper to Judge Monroe, then turned and read aloud. "The DNA test results confirm. The genetic match between Mr. Walter Morrow and Eli Parker is 99.99%. Mr. Walter is the legal biological father." 1 second. 2. 3. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. No one said a word. Only the faint rustle of fabric could be heard as Shannon staggered backward and dropped into her seat, as if the blood had drained from her body. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing, black mascara streaking down her cheeks. But those tears weren't from remorse. They were the tears of someone exposed. "I didn't mean to," she screamed. "I just wanted to live. I just wanted to keep my son. I didn't know what else to do." Not a single person in the room looked at her with sympathy. Even the female social worker sitting in the back slowly shook her head as if she'd seen enough. Brina stepped forward and placed a file in front of the judge. "Your Honor, we request the court to consider the following violations: intentional federal welfare fraud over the course of 8 years, abuse and neglect of a minor, and obstruction of Mr. Walter's legal parental rights." She flipped through the pages. Images appeared on the overhead screen, Shannon's spending records. Not on Eli, but on hair salons, spas, vacations, and lavish meals. Not a cent had gone toward healthcare or education. The total amount of federal aid, more than $72,000, was withdrawn consistently each month and funneled directly into her personal expenses. Daniel then played an audio recording. Eli's voice came from the speaker, barely louder than a breath. Mum hit my head against the wall. She said if I told anyone, she'd throw me out on the street." The room held its breath. Judge Monroe set the file down, nudged his silver-rimmed glasses up the bridge of his nose, sat in quiet thought for a few moments, then struck the gavel. "The court declares Mr. Walter Morrow is the legal biological father and is granted full custody of Eli Parker. The defendant, Shannon Parker, is sentenced to 5 years probation, permanently barred from contacting Eli, and ordered to repay all fraudulent welfare funds. Child Protective Services will oversee Eli's psychological care and recovery during the initial stages of his new life." Shannon wasn't screaming anymore. She sat frozen, head bowed, eyes vacant, like her soul had been drained out. Her lips trembled, but no sound came. In front of hundreds of eyes, she was no longer the woman in control. She was someone who had been left behind. In every sense of the word. For 8 years, Shannon had crafted a flawless narrative, a struggling single mother, fighting poverty, raising a fatherless child. But beneath that carefully constructed mask lay a chilling truth. She hadn't kept Eli out of love, but out of vengeance and greed. When Walter left her all those years ago over differences, over choosing his career, Shannon couldn't bear the abandonment. She had pleaded, she had cried, she had cursed him. And when she discovered she was pregnant, she didn't call, didn't say a word. She chose to keep the baby as a silent weapon, something to justify her hatred, a hidden chain to bind Walter without his knowledge. But more than anything, it was her way of clinging to some fragment of worth in a world that had discarded her. Over the years, welfare money became her primary means to live the life Walter once denied her: dressing up, partying, shopping. It was her quiet revenge. If you don't love me anymore, then I'll use America's money to love myself. Eli was just a side note, a living witness to a resentment that never healed. But now, with the truth laid bare, with her mask shattered before justice and public gaze, Shannon had nothing left but a cold hollow in her chest. She didn't cry because she lost her child. She cried because she lost the last role she had to play in the life she desperately tried to hold on to. All that remained was ash. Out in the hallway, Eli sat on a bench, staring out through a large glass window. When the courtroom doors opened, he jumped to his feet. Walter stepped out. Their eyes met. The crowd went silent as the small boy ran forward, his footsteps pounding against the marble floor, cutting through the heavy air like a blade. "Are you going to leave me again?" The question came out soft, like a breeze brushing the ear, but it sliced into Walter's chest like a knife. He didn't answer with words. He dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around his son, holding him tightly, as if letting go would mean losing him all over again. "I was late, but this time, I'm staying. Forever." Eli didn't cry. He just nodded, burying his face into his father's chest. That small heart at last had found a rhythm it could trust. Walter stood, guiding Eli past the rows of cameras. No one stopped them. No one asked questions, because everything had already been answered with action. The doors of District Court Number 5 closed behind them, but another door, warmer, truer, had just opened ahead. Under the bright midday sun, surrounded by a silent crowd, a father and son had finally found their way to each other. No court order, no DNA test, just one real embrace and a promise that would never be taken back. The glass doors swung open. Walter stepped out of the courthouse. He wore a white shirt, no blazer, tie loosened. His face was tired, but his eyes still held firm resolve. As he passed by, Shannon spoke, her voice hoarse. "You hate me that much, that you want to erase me from his world." Walter stopped. He didn't turn right away. Only after a deep breath did he slowly face her. "I don't hate you, Shannon. I just can't forgive the way you treated Eli. I know, I did wrong, but I was just trying to survive. When you left, I had nothing but him. I thought, if I could keep him, then maybe I still mattered." Walter looked at her. Pain flickered in his eyes for a moment, then faded back to cold resolve. "You kept him, but you let him go hungry, let him hurt, let him believe he was a mistake. I didn't know how to be a mother. No one ever taught me." Walter paused for a second. Then he stepped closer, stopping right in front of her. "And Eli didn't have time to wait for you to learn. He needed someone who wouldn't turn love into a weapon." The Grayson estate was no longer just a place of glass walls, abstract paintings, and cold hallways. 2 months after the final court hearing, it had become a real home filled with music in the evenings, the smell of fresh-baked pastries from a newly reopened kitchen, and the sound of small footsteps running down the hall, sometimes hesitant, but no longer afraid. Eli still kept his early morning routine. He was always the first one in the kitchen, tiptoeing to reach the cereal box, then fumbling with the milk like a captain aboard a spaceship, fulfilling his mission. His room, redesigned exactly according to a pencil sketch he once drew, had now become a world of light and wonder. Hanging from the ceiling was a rotating model of the solar system, glowing gently when the lights were off. His tall bookshelves were packed with comic books, astronomy guides, and one entire wall was covered in Polaroids from his first swim lesson, his first batch of cookies, to the day he played his first tune on the piano, all by himself. Walter didn't speak much, but it was plain to see he had changed. Fewer meetings, fewer flights. But he never missed a single one of his son's classes. The man who once poured his life into building a global empire was now devoting every ounce of himself to learning how to be a father. Every night, as Eli closed his bedroom door, he would always call out, "Good night, Dad." And Walter always answered softly, but with quiet certainty, "Good night, son." One Saturday afternoon, in the downtown auditorium, the launch of the Voice of the Forgotten Foundation was held elegant, yet warm. On stage, Walter sat silently in the front row, watching Eli, dressed in a white button-up shirt and a small tie, step up to the podium. The lights glowed gently. Behind him hung the foundation's silver-leaf logo, symbolizing children who were once forgotten, but never worthless. Eli unfolded a piece of paper. His hands trembled slightly, but he lifted his head, and his voice was clear. "I used to believe I was a mistake to be hidden, punished, turned into something unwanted. I didn't dare to speak or ask or dream. But then I called out, 'Dad,' and your voice was the first answer I ever had in my life. A breath. From that day on, I had a real name, a home, laughter, and I knew I was never a mistake." The auditorium fell silent. An elderly woman dabbed her eyes. A father in the back row gently squeezed his daughter's hand. Walter looked up. His eyes were red, but steady. Eli stepped down and walked toward his father. In his hands, he carried a small object wrapped in velvet. He opened it. It was an old phone, screen cracked. The one that had buzzed that fateful morning when Eli made a call on a tiny sliver of hope. "I want this to be placed in your office, inside a glass case." The boy had prepared a small note, written in black ink. "That call changed my life." Walter knelt down and wrapped his arms around his son. He said nothing, just patted the boy's back, an embrace that was steady, remorseful, and whole. That night, under the soft glow of the orbiting nightlight in his room, Eli lay on his side, staring out the window. No more nightmares. No more silent screams. No more waiting for someone to come save him. Because now that someone was here. Each day, Eli learned something new. How to trust. How to love. How to grow without fearing abandonment. And Walter, he learned how to listen. Not with his ears, but with his heart. At the far end of the backyard, beside a newly built swing, Walter carved the words by hand. "Here, my son grows." No longer silent, and within the scars of the past, they built a future. Not perfect, but real. A family, a new one. One that finally meant something. Maybe all of us, at some point in life, receive a call. Not always from a phone, but perhaps a sign, a moment. Something that stops us in our tracks, makes us reflect and act. Walter heard his son's voice, not with his ears, but with his heart, and he chose not to turn away. This story isn't just about a father finding his son again. It's about trust, about healing, and about the one thing stronger than pain, unconditional love. What would you do if you were in Walter's place? Would you believe a phone call from a child you've never met? And if you were Eli, would you have the courage to call someone you only knew from a single photo? I truly want to hear what you think. Don't be shy. Leave a comment below. And if you're going through something tough right now, let me say this. You're not alone. Are you okay? Is there something you've been carrying in silence? If so, I hope today is the day someone truly listens.